don't kill the messenger, because the show's gonna do it for you. The title of this episode is Messenger, but it should be called Tension, because everything is about setting up for the inevitable conflict between the Gorman Front and the Empire. The episode just flies by, and the crazy part is, nothing really happens in it. It's just that the writing is so good that it makes watching people find out about the coming storm some of the most riveting TV I've seen in a while. I said it in the last video, and I'm going to say it again. I don't know how Disney is going to top this. Now, I said nothing really happens. That's not entirely true. There is a lot of setup, and it's very well done. It's another time jump to a year later, 2 years before the Battle of Yavin. I want to start with Mon Mothma, mostly because of this set for the Senate. This location is incredible. When I think sci-fi building, this is what pops into my head. Now, here's the kicker. Everything but the background is real. Yes, including the water. This is a real place in Valencia, Spain called the City of Arts and Sciences. I have to go to this place. I need to see this in person. It really does look like something out of a sci-fi novel. And it grounds the scenes because the VFX teams really don't need to do anything. It's all right there. I mean, I'm sure they tweaked quite a bit, but man, what a location. Anyway, Mon Mothma arrives at the Senate building and her driver gets all up in her business. So she suspects he's a spy. That's the first inkling of the trouble Mon is in. The next is when she meets with the Gorman Senator Fang Zar. He mentions a bombing on Gorman that everyone knows was done by the Empire, but the situation has gone so far that there's nothing anyone can do. The end of Gorman is coming. The only question is, how bad will it be? I love Mon Mothma's reaction to this, her slow realization that she's basically talking to a dead man. You see it come across her face. She knows the Empire will take him out, and now she knows how helpless they've made themselves by playing by the rules. Like any authoritarian state, the Empire doesn't care about any rules. For them, it's nothing but a pretense. They play along until they're confident they've got total control. Then they won't bother hiding their abuse of power, which is why they're amping up the situation on Gorman. Andor makes a point of showing this happen over a course of years, but it can easily happen in a few months. It's just a matter of how much political power an authoritarian state has and how gullible the populace is to fall for the state's lies or root for them to exercise their power with impunity. This was also the scene I was talking about when I mentioned that the show had a better take on Mon Mothma's world collapsing around her than that silly-ass dance. In this scene, we see what it costs her, not just her family life, but her very principles. Everything she stood for has been weaponized against her. And now it dawns on her that this situation can't be combated with typical political maneuvering. She's still not committed to being more proactive, but now she understands exactly what's at stake. I like this much better because it ties into the broader story, and she has to act, to do something more than dance in a fucking circle. Meanwhile, Bix, Wilman, and Cassian now live on Yavin 4 with the rebellion. When Will returns from a mission, Cassian asks where he's been, but Will hesitates to tell him. He does spill that he's been working with Luthen, who's become persona non grata at this point. The rebellion is building up an army, and to do that means bringing in lots of people. Unvetted people, which probably doesn't sit well with Luthen. It definitely doesn't sit well with Will, because he doesn't trust any of them. But like Cassian says, they need an army to beat the Empire. This is the only way to win. The show doesn't delve that deeply into this, but it is worth pointing out that Will winds up with the rebellion proper instead of staying with Saw Gerrera. Essentially, there are two armies at play here, Saw's mercenaries and Yavin's rebels, and there is some conflict between them, which again the show really doesn't get into. However, I found it interesting that even though Will complains about not being able to trust the people showing up at Yavin, he still chose Yavin over Saw. Was that because of Saw's methods? When he thinks he can't trust someone, he kills them? Was it because Cassian and Bix are there? Was it because of his loyalty to Luthen? None of this is really answered conclusively, but it's probably the latter too. I just like the contradiction of Will distrusting the Yavin army when he might have joined that group because he may not fully trust Saw Gerrera. Cassian eventually gets Will to say where he's been, to Gorman. He's been on the planet at Luthen's request because that's where Dedra is, and Luthen has a plan. He wants Cassian to kill Dedra. She's holed up right across from the plaza. They'll never get a better chance to take her out. But Cassian hesitates. The situation from the last episode between him and Luthen is still pretty raw, even a year later. Another thing that's still amped up is Cassian's distrust. It's even worse than before. He literally tells Bix not to tell anyone where he's been or about his job. And these are the people he's supposed to be leading. But it sets up the distance we see with Cassian in Rogue One, where he's all business. How does he get to that point? Well, by telling his girlfriend, "Don't tell people about me." Anyway, Cassian got injured on the previous mission, and the wound isn't healing well, so Bix tricks Cassian into meeting with a Force healer. Real quick, I know some people might say that's not a thing. It is a thing. It's been a part of the expanded universe for a while, so this isn't something Disney made up. For whatever reason, Cassian wants nothing to do with Force users. Maybe I forgot something from the first season, but I genuinely can't remember why he has this problem. While he argues with Bix, the Force user randomly detects Cassian, comes to him, and senses his injury. When she touches him, she senses something else. She mentions his clarity and a feeling that he's meant for something, but she looks very sad when she says this, implying that she probably got a premonition about his mission in Rogue One and his death. This is the only time we see anything connected to the Force in the show, and it's cagey at best. It's played almost like the Force really doesn't exist, which seems weird since it hasn't been that long since the Jedi were wiped out. However, it does fit the lore, especially with the first film where it seemed like the average person thought the Force wasn't real. Now, to be honest, I never bought the idea that people could forget about space wizards in barely 2 decades. This would be like someone in their 40s forgetting about MTV VJs. I know you haven't thought about them for 20 years, but you still know they were a thing. I just feel like even in the crazy sci-fi world of Star Wars, people will remember the space wizards were legit. But, like I said, it does fit the lore that people would be skeptical about it. After the Purge, there wouldn't be that many people running around using Force powers in the open, so I can buy that after 20 years, it'd be uncommon, like spotting somebody with a Jerry curl. It happens, and every time you see it, you have to wipe the juice from your eyes just to make sure it's real. At any rate, Cassian decides to take the mission to Gorman and heads there with Will. Cassian winds up at the same hotel he visited before, and guess who's at the front desk? The bellhop from before, who makes it very clear he's now with the Gorman front. The Empire placed the plaza on curfew, loaded it with anti-riot gear, and requires certain permissions to check in, which Cassian doesn't have. The bellhop lets him through, but tells Cassian that his co-worker will rat Cassian out, so he needs to be careful. He gives Cassian the same room as before, which, oddly enough, has a perfect view of Daedra's office. Unfortunately for Cassian, but fortunately for Daedra, stormtroopers are in the room above Cassian, so he's got to figure out how to kill her and get out without getting caught. Meanwhile, Will meets with the Gorman front and finds himself a lady friend. Look, come on now. You just saw what happened with Vel and Cinta. Come on now. Okay, so, mild spoiler. They get a pass, but they're only lucky because there's so much death. But if it wasn't for that body count, oh, one of them would definitely be gone. Either way, the situation with the Gorman front has completely fallen apart. The Empire's been faking attacks in their name, including the most recent bombing, turning some people against them. And following the bombing, the Gorman front is torn on what to do. Rylands wants to engage in peaceful protest, while others think they need to fight back. And both come to that conclusion for the same reason. They realize they've already lost. It all comes down to how they'll make their final stand. Do they want to show they mean no harm so the galaxy will see the Empire's brutality for what it is? Or will they fight back, knowing they'll die? Unfortunately for them, the Empire plans on turning whatever they do against them. Leo Partagas tells Daedra that they couldn't find an alternative to the mineral found on Gore, so the Emperor decided to move on Gore. The people will be resettled as soon as possible. And much to Daedra's chagrin, Partagas sends Captain Pilo to manage the situation. Daedra is still technically in charge, but Pilo will handle all the tactics. In short, Daedra's just a figurehead now. Partagas tries to talk her into seeing that as a positive, but Daedra is very annoyed about it because she was kept in the dark. She really thinks she's more important to this process than she actually is, but at least she has the sense to realize how she's been maneuvered. When Pilo's troops arrive, they are green. Super green. It's painfully obvious to Daedra they're not ready for the job, and it's also obvious that this wasn't an accident. The Empire is looking for a reason to take down the Gormans, and what better way to do that than with fresh recruits who will probably overreact at the smallest provocation. They're perfect cannon fodder. completely oblivious to the fact that they're being used. Speaking of being used, Cyril shows up and confronts Dedra about doing the same thing to him. He realizes something's off about what's happening on Gorman. Dedra tells him to sit back and wait because they've accomplished their goal and they'll be able to go home soon, and it throws Cyril off because he realizes he hasn't accomplished anything. They're no closer to finding Axis, so what was this all for? He starts pondering out loud, so Dedra kisses him to shut him up and he jerks away like, whoa, 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 whoa. You put your mouth on people? Gross. This was my favorite moment in the episode. They're so awkward together, it's perfect. So then Cyril tries to warn Enza and get her to rat out the broader rebellion in the hopes she'll be spared, and she just slaps the shit out of him. None of this is going his way, and he's starting to realize, far too late, that he's been played. The question everyone gets left with at the end of the episode is, how do you handle this? Like I said, not much happens in this episode, but it does a great job of laying the groundwork for what's to come. I'm just impressed that this is the same show that had Mon Mothma dancing in a circle 4 episodes ago. It's just so fucking good. I forgot TV shows could be this good. And it still gets better. I genuinely don't know how Disney or Lucasfilm will follow this. What can they put out? The only thing I can think of is telling the stories between the original films, filling in the gaps of what was going on in the rebellion while Luke was off with Han and Leia. If they keep the same creative team and the cast who survives through Rogue One, that could make for some good television. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.